The Kaesong Industrial Park just north of the demilitarized zone has been the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean cooperation since it started operations in December 2004. But in 2013, all activities at the industrial complex were suspended for 5 months amid strained relations between the South and North. The combined losses, which was reported to the Unification Ministry, was nearly $1 billion.
We have more than $293,000 worth of products in stock. I can't pay the workers and can't control the bills.
Considering there are 123 businesses in the industrial complex and about 6,500 cooperative companies, the total scale of the damage is difficult to pinpoint. In a 7th round of working-level talks, the two Koreas finally reached an agreement on reopening the industrial complex 166 days after it was first shut down.
국제적 공단이 되기 위한
We will focus on attracting more foreign businesses and improving a variety of systems to the international level, as part of efforts to globalize the complex.
But it has been almost a year since the two Koreas agreed to globalize the industrial complex, and there have been no tangible results to speak of. Is there any possibility of the goal being realized?
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. You are watching Upfront. I'm Na-hyun Kyung.
I'm Yoo Jong-soo. On today's Upfront, we discuss the possibility of globalizing Kaesong Industrial Complex.
And for today's topic, we invited Dr. Hyun Jung-taek, Vice Chairman of the National Economic Advisory Council, and Mr. Byun Ha-jung, Vice President of the International Cooperation at the Hyundai Asan Corporation. Thank you both very much for coming to the studio today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, here is a simple question for both of you. Why do you think we need to globalize the Kaesong Industrial Complex? Is it to improve the joint Korean relationships ahead of reunification or unification, or to improve the economic benefit?
I think obviously it's for both. Yeah, any kind of business transaction is related to economic benefit. So in that sense, improving Kaesong Industrial Complex or globalization of Kaesong Industrial Complex will increase economic benefit. But at the same time, as you know, Kaesong Complex is a symbol of inter-Korean relation. Currently, I think the Kaesong is the only meaningful economic relation between South and North Korea. So in that sense, expanding business opportunity by globalization will also expand the overall operation. So in that sense, it helps both the economic benefit and inter-Korean economic relation.
And Mr. Byun?
I agree with you. And development of Kaesong Industrial Complex is to achieve mutual cooperation and coexistence of both Korea. And it's the first step for the future unification. So KICs should be globalized, not only for the future unification, but also for the economic benefit.
Now, what's the must factor, though? Why can't it just stay the way it is now?
Globalization is a necessary prerequisite for stable and continuous growth of Kaesong Industrial Complex. And year 2000, Hyundai Asan and North Korea have agreed to develop Kaesong Industrial Complex as an international complex where a world leading company will be participating. And further, globalization process of KIC as a first mutual agreement reached between South and North under President Park's regime, and is meaning for normalization too. So globalization of KIC will truly give positive contribution to the international inter-Korean exchange and cooperation.
Interesting. Though some of international communities has been critical of the industrial compound because money making there going straight to the Kim Jong-un's regime. What is your take on this?
I've been to Washington, D.C. This May, and then we had a seminar right, about this inter-Korean economic relation. And then as you said, some experts were suspect that aspect. They didn't say cash cow or dollar bucks, but I think that the implication is the concern. Let me tell you this story. I was in China in 1991. It was about 23 years ago. We hired Chinese people, but the form of the contract is through a contract with Chinese company. The company is 100% government-funded company. So we not directly pay to the Chinese employee. So the payment goes through this Chinese company, and maybe about 2/3 of salary is taken by the company.
The state,
so
the
maybe,
company.
Yeah, so it went into state. The logic behind this Chinese company is saying that they are providing the overhead costs, so-called. So they are preparing their apartment for these workers, and they're commuting, and maybe the education. It is a socialist country. So to a certain extent, where I think that they have certain right, because they provide a lot of, and not like market economy. So I know the concern. In particular about the Americans. But you have to think about the other aspect, that is experiencing the market. So there are about 50,000 workers in Kaesong, and including their families, about 200,000. And they work in Korean companies, so they earn the salary. So they learn the market economy there. It's not just learning. Actually, they are making life. Their life is dependent on the market. So the effect of this, or experiencing or educating these people, will be very much positive.
So instead of focusing on what we cannot control, it's wiser to focus on the things that have the future, is what you're saying. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yes, like he said, every issue has pros and cons. The point is this: to what we give our priority. Yes. So if we place emphasis on unification through the improvement of inter-Korean relation, and globalization is necessary. And I'm going to give you some background about this Kaesong Industrial Complex. Kaesong has suggested by former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, not by South Korean. And he said to the former Hyundai Business Group chairman Jung Mong-hun, and he said, once you go back to Seoul, tell everybody that the 38th parallel line has been moved upward without no gunshot. So what makes KIC special, the Kaesong Industrial Complex special and meaningful, is that KIC is an inter-Korean industrial complex built on North Korean military base. Support with South Korean capital and technology. And so it is hard to evaluate its value, with the economic benefits or economic measures.
Now, currently, the South Korean government certainly seems to think that the Kaesong Industrial Complex has a lot of potential economically, but let's now try to get a perspective from outside of Korea. Joining us is Mr. Troy Stangeron. He's the Senior Director of the Congressional Affairs and Trade at the Korea Economic Institute of America. So, Mr. Stangeron, what's your stance on this issue? Do you agree with globalizing the complex?
I think moving for globalization is an important step. I think it will be something that will take place over time. The biggest issue will be who will the first mover be, meaning, the first international company that will look to invest. There was a story a couple years ago that the Lee Myung-bak administration decided to have IKEA invest in Kaesong. it's unlikely that a brand name firm will be the first one to take the plunge. But once you have one firm who's willing to take and invest, other firms will start looking at the complex more seriously. And over time, that will help take and build the right foundations for other companies from the international community to take and invest in Kaesong.
As an economist, what do you think are the remaining challenges in attracting more foreign investments?
Ultimately, the investment potential in Kaesong will depend on things like the political risk involved in investing in the park, the regulatory regime that's in place, the labor conditions, and the labor supply. Right now, when we look at Kaesong, one of the challenges has been that there's a high level of political risk from North Korea. We saw this last year when North Korea unilaterally withdrew its workers, shutting the complex down for a 5-month period. We've seen this in the past where they've tried to take and unilaterally raise wages, impose taxes beyond what has been agreed. So there's a high level of political risk for any international firm looking to invest in Kaesong. At the same time, South Korean firms in the past have also faced challenges in terms of taking and having an adequate supply of labor within the complex. So addressing these types of issues, the political risk, the regulatory regime under which companies will function, the labor supply issues are all going to be key issues moving forward in terms of Kaesong successfully developing and becoming an international industrial zone.
So which countries are we talking about here as some of the key potential investors?
I think the country that will ultimately be the most effective and the most involved will most likely be China. There's a lot of logic in this, in that one, North Korea already does a lot of business with China. Two, you have the industrial zones at Rason, also the two island zones on the border with North Korea and China. So there's already Chinese investment and industrial zones taking place within North Korea. It seems logical that Chinese companies would feel comfortable potentially investing in the zone. So I think China is sort of a logical choice. I think it's something that South Korea would most likely welcome in terms of bringing in Chinese investment into the zone. And they're the ones that are most likely to be willing to take the risk. Beyond China, I think the countries you're most likely to see invest in Kaesong will be countries who are not necessarily involved in the nuclear dispute with North Korea. So perhaps some other Southeast Asian nations, we've seen North Korea reach out to them over the last year in terms of investing in other projects either within Kaesong or other areas. So you might see other countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, and some other Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia as well potentially look to invest as well.
All right, so mainly China, but some Southeast Asian nations as well. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. That was Mr. Troy Stangerone, the Senior Director of the Congressional Affairs and Trade at the Korea Economic Institute of America. And now we have on the line Mr. Mihail Erdl. He's the CEO of Me and Friends AG. That's the first foreign business that decided to invest in the Kaesong complex. Mr. Erdl, thank you for talking to us today.
That's my pleasure.
Now, any progress on the investment deal?
The company we are discussing with is Samduk Tongsan, but at the moment it is the policy of the globalization from the point of the Korean government is not clear at the moment. So we're still waiting for the Korean government. I personally visited Kaesong Industrial Complex about 4 or 5 times now, and I've seen the development Kaesong has done the last years. We saw the quality is very good. We see there is no language problem between the management from South Korea and the people working in North Korea. We really think this can be an interesting investment. We also see that the surroundings, the buildings, the how the people can work there is on a very high level.
Your company is the first foreign company to begin investing in the Kaesong Industrial Complex. You are from Germany, a country that was divided not so long ago. I imagine the link to Korea might carry an important meaning.
Of course, if you look at the history, and we are a German company, this is, of course, something this is coming from our heart to do that. As the Kaesong Industrial Complex is under the umbrella of the Ministry of Unification, it would be a great story for us to help the Korean people to come together as one, so South and North coming together like the German did 20 years ago. So, of course, this has a meaning for us. There is no doubt.
All right, so a very special meaning indeed. Many thanks to you, sir, for sharing your story with us today.
Was my pleasure. Hope to see you soon in Korea.
Cheap labor costs are one of the main benefits in regard to investing in Kaesong Industrial Complex. Do you agree?
Yeah, on average, it is right. I think the wage there is low. On yearly basis, for example, comparing the other countries, Qingdao of China is that they have about $5,000 a year. Ho Chi Minh City of Vietnam is $2,700. And Kaesong of North Korea is around $1,500 a year. On monthly salary basis, I have the numbers. Vietnam is 213, so Kaesong is 134. But you have to compare this wage with the productivity, so how they can work. So it varies upon the individuals and the companies. But at the initial stage of Kaesong, their productivity was low because of the habit of socialist hours working system. So there was no incentives. But after the operation of a couple of years, I think in general the productivity is increased. And from the viewpoint of individual, when they first working in the Korean company in Kaesong, where they still maintain the habit of socialist working systems, so productivity is low. But after a year or two, I heard the productivity at some people is as close as Chinese people, or at least much higher than our Vietnam. Also, on average, their productivities were on parallel with ASEAN countries. So in that sense, you can think the wage advantage in
It's very
investing there.
competitive.
Yes.
Though North Korea recently demanded the wage increase, and do you think this might provide problem in terms of attracting foreign businesses?
Oh, I don't think so.
No?
Because their average wage is $140 per month, including overtime and social benefit. It's only 30% of Chinese workers in year 2012. That was $480. So it's not going to affect any investment from all over the world.
So when you say including overtime, that's an assumed assumption of a salary, though $140.
Yes, it includes everything, social benefits and overtimes, and so yes, only 30%.
I almost agree with what he said. I think that the demand of wage increase will not be a big, I think, critical problem for foreign investors. But I just want to add a modification. You have to look at each company's situation. Well, on average, the wage is low, but as far as this company is getting profit, then the wage increase can be made. So if a certain company, they cannot, in Korean company, for example, doesn't make profit, then I think that the demand may be too much. So on every case of wage demand, even in South Korea, in Germany, whatever, I think the wage demand is a sensitive issue. It's a case, you have to look at case by case. One thing we have to emphasize is the way how the system works. So it's not about the level of the wage, but the method how to deal with. So we want to know the transparency and predictability. So in that sense, I think there is already an agreement or regulation in North Korea that at least in principle, the wage increase is once a year and 5%. But if such transparency and predictability is interrupted, then that may
That could be a
cause
problem.
a problem.
And Mr. Stangeron also did mention this, but it's more the matter of the labor supply than the wage that might cause a problem here. So, Mr. Byun, could you walk us through the process of how workers are allocated in the Kaesong complex?
Yes, there is a company, and they want some workers, right? So they submit their application to North Korean recruiting agency.
So the South Korean businesses submit the application.
Right, application to North Korean government agency. How many people you need? what kind of background you need. And once they receive your application, and the North Korean agencies select the workers that meet their requirement, the South Korean whatever the company's requirement and conditions, and they try to match what you need. I mean, request by the companies. That's the procedure.
But shouldn't the complex be able to provide a more fundamental solution where the companies will not have to worry about having enough workers available in order to lure in more foreign investment?
I think there is a legitimate concern, and then I think we have to address that. Yeah, as a KEI, our staff, as I mentioned, I said I have a sympathy with that. It is really it's an on general picture big issue. There is, as I said, about 52,000 workers, and including their families, about 200,000, and it's almost as close as the total population of Kaesong. And then, you know that the population mobility is not easy in North Korea. So in that sense, a comprehensive supply program should be, I think, added. So on that topic, I think that South Korean government is talking with the North Korean government. Having said that, North Korea also wanted, whereas they can supply the workers, but you have to supply the facilities. So building the apartment, then they can supply. But we are talking about globalization. So getting some foreign companies here, I don't think that issue is, at least at the initial stage, is a big issue. There are already about more than 100 companies there. Then they have recruited the workers. We are not talking about 100 foreign companies coming into Kaesong.
Right, not in the beginning phase.
So, yeah, not at the beginning stage. So we're after 2 or 3 or a few companies, then that cannot be a big problem. And after they come in, then you will expedite for solution of the problem. So North Korean government can do more active.
Well, since you mentioned globalization of the complex, what do you think North Korea government should do more to globalize this complex?
Well, at the moment, to be frank, I think the contract or the business practice is very peculiar type. We have to set up a specific, I think, agreement on how the people move, how the material moves. So it's not a normal business practice in global standard. So there are many issues, but so-called samtung or maybe I can interpret
dealing with communications, customs, and passing.
Three free flows. So personnel, free flow personnel, so you can move in the business people, and the communication and the material itself.
Internet set up there.
So those kind of things that we have to solve it, and then there will be more cooperative. I don't think the globalization, the North Korean government will adopt global standard at once, but at least at the pace of globalization, they will be.
So
accustomed
you are saying the North Korean government has a strong will to globalize the complex?
I assume that first of all, they have agreed. South Korean government and North Korean government is agreed. And another point is that not just in Kaesong, but as the principle of the direction of their economy, they also mentioned about the development of the economy, including in that the general picture that inviting foreign investor is in there. But mentioning or talking is one thing, so it will be very hard and tough for them to implement all this, but we have to work together to make them.
I hate to say this, but we never know what's going on in North Korea, really.
Right.
Do you have any opinions on this, Mr. Byun?
First, I want to give some background about the labor supply. In year 2000, and former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il met my company's chairman, Jung Mong-hwan, and he promised that North would supply as many workers as needed, you know, if necessary. If that's not enough, then he's willing to use his soldier. Yeah.
Interesting.
This is a true story. So this is a clear indication that North Korea are willing to provide enough manpower to Kaesong Industrial Complex.
Right. Well, I mean, the complex still has a long way to go until it can be considered a truly international complex. But some foreign businessmen definitely have shown their interest. So here are some examples.
For the first time since the two Koreas reached an agreement on globalization, G20 delegates visited Kaesong in December. About 60 government officials and delegates from international financial organizations who participated in the G20 Seoul Conference checked on the overall conditions in management of the Kaesong Industrial Complex.
We are very delighted to see that the GIC is contributing to the peace and prosperity of the South and North Korean people.
Following the G20 delegation, representatives from renowned German companies visited the industrial park on April 29th with an eye on finding better investment markets. A Russian fish company even proposed a business plan to South Korea's unification ministry after visiting the Kaesong Park. One of the biggest traders associations, comprised of 6,000 CEOs from 68 different countries, sent representatives this month for their first visit to Kaesong.
What are the types of foreign businesses that would fit well with what the industry complex does?
We have heard such interview with the German company workers, and then I understand that he is in the field of the footwear. So I think naturally manufacturing item, and among that manufacturing, most of the export items and maybe some kind of labor intensive, so textile or footwear should be the first. I think that priority from the viewpoint of foreign investors. But there are criticism, or other than this cash cow or dollar box issues, and some foreign economists said this Kaesong is so much isolated, so there is not so much dissemination effect to other parts of North Korea.
No flexibility.
In that sense, I hope that not just global investors, but Korean investors, if there is some business which can have effect to other parts of North Korea. For example, the agro business that is processing the agricultural products might be a good, I think, candidate for that. So if we can make a business in Kaesong and using the agricultural products of North Korean part, and then with that agricultural product processing Kaesong would be a good example. Or some companies in Kaesong can use some very simple parts of North Korean made manufacturing products. That would be a good cases. So that kind of business, but it's again, business is business. It's up to the foreign investors. If they can make profit, then they can choose.
Right, it's their decision, not ours, certainly. Do you have any ideas on what kind of companies can benefit from Kaesong?
Actually, there is a master plan for Kaesong Industrial Complex, and Hyundai Asan Corporation, we are the developer of Kaesong Industrial Complex. So in year 2005, we have agreement with the North Korean government. So the Kaesong Industrial Complex will be developed by 3 phases. We are now, the total area is 16,000 acres. We are now on the first phase development, which is 800 acres. Okay, for during first phase investment, the development, the Kaesong would invite labor-intensive business, because we thought that that has more chance of success. So first, labor-intensive, but however, the second and third phase development Kaesong will promote high-tech industries such as electric, and IT.
So you believe the complex should gear towards high-tech industries and moving on from textile and manufacturing industries?
Yes. Well, it will take some time, but we will get there.
How feasible do you think that plan is, though? I mean, how many years are we talking about it in the future to see that realized?
When we first start this business, it's 2000, okay? And we've been discussing with this a long time ago. And by year 2020, we have an index. By 2020, there will be like more than 2,000 companies residing in Kaesong Industrial Complex, and about 350,000 North Korean will be hired, and annual product will be like a 20 billion US dollar.
So 6 years from now, I think we need to really start working on the project in a way.
It will take more time.
Dr. Hyun, how does UN sanction affect our plan to bring in more high-tech industries in industrial complex?
At the current moment, the issue is very much complicated. So it is related to maintaining the restriction of containing the weapons of mass destruction. So in that sense, or in addition to the time frame that North Korea's commitment to the international peacekeeping, so we're including that following up the UN resolution. So those kind of, I think, issues. So you're right. It is sensitive and complicated, but must be resolved in addition to other issues, in particular about the very high tech.
Okay, thank you. The investment from the Koreans overseas is very interesting option. Mr. Byun, you have met many Korean businessmen working overseas.
Yes.
What are their the attitude toward investing in Kaesong Industrial Complex?
From my experience, not only Korean businessmen overseas, but also foreign investors that have positive, the interest to the investment in Kaesong Industrial Complex. And I cannot reveal their names, but there was even a secret visit to Kaesong Industrial Complex. It's a very famous company in the world. And let me share my experience. In year 2008, I visited Kaesong Industrial Complex with 40 prospective Korean businessmen overseas from Los Angeles, California, and Korean Apparel Manufacturing Association in cooperation with the Korean Federation Textile Industry. And they have their own facilities, the factories, clothing factories in China and Mexico. And after their visit, they showed their interest to moving their factory into Kaesong Industrial Complex. And the other incident was, it was in year 2007. Moody's and Goldman Sachs visit Korea for a country rating. And they request to visit Kaesong Industrial Complex because they think Kaesong is geologically, it's an important place. And after their visit, they have an interview. They said the Kaesong optimistic future of South and North Korea. That's what they said.
Well, that was about 6-7 years ago. Do you believe that overseas South Korean businesses they can still make a huge contribution in globalizing the Kaesong Complex?
Yes. The Korean businessmen overseas, they're businessmen, right? And they love this country.
It's their motherland, after all.
And technically they are not Koreans. So from investor point of all over the world, their investment in Kaesong will be considered as foreign investment to Kaesong Industrial Complex. In that way, the foreign investor can be assured that Kaesong is the place worth investing. In this way, their investment in Kaesong Industrial Complex induce more investment and lead to globalization of Kaesong Industrial Complex.
And Dr. Hyun?
Yeah, I think as far as Korean businessmen overseas or Korean American or whatever you call, they can play a bridging role. I think they are, ethically or the Koreans, but nationality maybe the foreigners. So they can fill in the part, and then they can initiate this globalization of Kaesong, and they work as an international investor so based on their nationality, and at the same time they have a language, I think, advantage compared to that
other foreign businesses.
other foreign business. Yes.
You know, as a matter of fact, we have someone who can tell us more about this from first-hand experience. Joining us is Chairman and CEO of Sonnet LLC, Mr. Jo Byung-tae. Thank you very much for joining us. You had a chance to visit the Kaesong complex recently. What was your overall assessment?
Yes, I was in Kaesong last week, but very good condition in everything. Include about building, also include about road condition and energy power. So everything is perfect because of they made from not North Korea, from South Korea made everything. Energy power also very good. That's why I like to make a plan to make a factory in Kaesong, but problem is still internet problem and smartphone problem. That is most difficult, but very close from Seoul, Korea. So only 1 hour, 40 miles from Korea and Seoul, Korea. That's mean about easy to bring raw material and sub material. That's why we are very interesting to make a factory over there.
What kinds of progress has been made when it comes to investment from Korean business? What are some of the remaining challenges?
Yes, that's still made in Korea labor is not allowed from Kaesong to United States. United States government, they need about, if we go FTA condition, we have to make about all conditions. We have to submit the document, but still problem in United States. But only not USA. So in made in Korea merchandise in Kaesong, we can sell to domestic in Korea, South Korea, also Asia and European country. That is allowed to shipping from the Kaesong to without United States, but a lot of global, still a lot of potential to shipping from Kaesong.
So you think the complex has much potential. Mr. Jo, what kind of contribution can South Korea expect from entrepreneurs such as yourself?
In overseas Korean businessmen, they are also Korean nation, or they speaking Korean language. Also their culture also Korean. That's why very easy to make a factory in Kaesong, because of the other countries, a lot of culture different and language different, also different nation. But in Kaesong is all we are same. So for future, I think a lot of Korean overseas businessmen love to make a factory in Kaesong. I think a lot of potential for future.
All right, thank you, sir, for joining us today. That was Mr. Jo Byung-tae, Chairman and CEO of U.S.-based firm Sonnet LLC.
Dr. Han, as Chairman Jo just briefly mentioned, the product made at Kaesong are still not considered as a product made in Korea, and therefore cannot benefit from some free trade deals. How can Korean government go about solving this problem?
First of all, I want to mention that some FTAs of Korea recognize Kaesong product as a Korean product. So, for example, Korea-Singapore FTA or Korea-EFTA or Korea-ASEAN FTA, in that agreement, I think Kaesong is already acknowledged as a Korean product. But the bigger players, as you said, as
US FTA.
US and EU, And well, again, to be frank, I think that U.S. is not ready to. We already have a clause, let's discuss in the future, or it's a clause in the agreement. But to be frank, U.S. is not ready to talk about the issue yet because of this, the emphasis on nuclear issue. So before the North Korean side move on this denuclearization, and then it may be very difficult to discuss the issue. EU is not very open to the issue either yet. So I hope that the North Koreans' attitude about this nuclear issue will be changed, and then that will be beneficial for those, I think, their economy and this Kaesong complex and inter-Korean relation.
Kaesong Industrial Complex can be a door for North Korea to become a member of international community. Thus, international society, including U.S., should give a chance to North Korea to join international community by recognizing KIC as offshore processing zone.
I think that's what the South Korean government had wanted as well, but it's something that we really can't push for, and the deal has already been closed. So we are hoping that in the future there will be more opportunities there. But now the previous Lee Myung-bak administration had imposed special sanctions dubbed the May 24th measures. That was in 2010 when the peninsula saw several provocations from the north. Is that hindering the globalization of the Kaesong complex?
Again, it is a very sensitive and very important issue. So let me make sure that May 21st measure is still effective currently. The measure, as you said, is taken after the North Korea's attack on Cheonan warship. What we want, the Korean side want, our South Korean side want, is, I think it's very basic, right? Natural. So the North Korea should acknowledge the misbehavior and apologize and promise not to do it again. That is very simple thing. So, but let me add one more, that May 21st measure do not restrict ongoing business of Korean companies that already have an operation in Kaesong. So it is an exception there. So that's the reason why Kaesong is going on. So the current business, okay. With regard to the international investor, as you know, right, that Korean government cannot make a jurisdiction. So where legally speaking, is jurisdiction out of the Korean government. So international investors can invest in there. Maybe so this globalization can proceed, or I think that the foreign investor can fit in the room of the current, I think, that situation.
And Mr. Byun?
Personally, this is personal idea. I think we should cancel May 24 measure to promote globalization of industrial complex. And the government is promoting normalization and globalization, aiming of developing and expanding mutual cooperation between two countries. So without canceling that May 24 measures, only a limited achievement may be expected.
So Korean companies, South Korean companies will be limited to invest, but you think that will
because okay, we saw that German company, right? They're talking about joint venture.
Right.
What if there is joint venture?
And what do you do is the question.
Yes. So anyway, we have to face this problem. So if you are talking about globalization, then you have to make a decision.
Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, but again, I want to emphasize that I think it is a consensus of the government, or at least a general public feeling about the issue of the Korean. So not just the government, general public feeling is, at least it is right to demand them, request them, that it is your fault, you must acknowledge, at least it is your behavior. And up to current moment, they don't say, they deny it, oh, it's not my thing. So at least before we move on that direction, they have to do some, I think, that first step.
Something
Wouldn't that
that's
be
very
simple?
hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simple, but it's very hard, right?
Right.
Yes.
Mr. Bian, I think this question both of you, but
Yes.
I'll ask you
I
first.
feel like it's going to be a hard, difficult question.
Yep. If on scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate nation's policy on globalizing the industrial complex?
I think it is too early to say that at the moment, because inter-Korean relation is experiencing rapid and massive change. And from Hyundai's perspective, we will do our best to achieve normalization of KIC, Kaesong Industrial Complex, so that globalization can be realized as soon as possible.
So I don't think you answered the question, but
It's very
it's
tough
very
question.
difficult to
Yes.
answer. We do understand that. Yes.
Dr. Hyun, can you rate?
As far as overall operation of Kaesong, I think we went more than halfway, so 7 or 8. But as far as the issue, the specific issue you mentioned, the globalization, the progress, or to make it objective, I think assessment, it is only beginning 1 or 2. But it's not about the policy. It's not. It's about the progress. So to be frank, the progress so far made is only the beginning. But the Korean government and the North Korean government and international said investors and organizations, all they have to do work hard. And this 3-term or the institutional preparation I already mentioned. In addition to that, investment guarantee and investment dispute settlement, all these kinds of works. But one, I think, good sign is they are having a meeting. They have a series of continuous meetings with South. Although it looks like this result is very slow and small, but we have a steady progress in discussion. So after we build up this institution, one, I think, other point I want to make is the people in international organizations are, for example, the head of the World Bank, you know them. But he is interested in this helping North Korea. But there is surrounding environment is not ripe yet. So if we made the right choice and North Korea is doing the right thing, then we can move on.
So the important thing is that we are making progress, is what you're saying. But based on everything that we said today, that we discussed here on this table, how likely is it that, do you think, is it that the complex will successfully become globalized?
Yeah, again, let me make it clear that the Korean government and business is making a best effort for it. And as we have heard during this program, lots of foreign investors, including Korean overseas businessmen, they are interested in. So I hope that for South Korean government, but more importantly, North Korean government, North Korean parties take it very seriously and cooperate for the development of Kaesong. So they have already made it their intention to make economic development plan. So globalization, I think they need more concrete action with regard to the Kaesong. So that will increase the possibility of the success, as you mentioned, of this globalization of Kaesong.
Now, Mr. Byun, you did say that the Hyundai Asan Group has a master plan. How likely is it that this will become successful in 20 years or 10 years' time?
Kaesong Industrial Complex will succeed because both countries have clear intention, and willingness to make this happen. And globalization of KIC is not something you want, I want. This is something we have to make it happen. So I hope everybody join in this process by yielding and understanding each other. So we have to make this happen.
All right, thank you very much, both of you, for coming to the studio and sharing your insights today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The South and North reached an agreement on globalizing the Kaesong Industrial Complex. To do it right, both Koreas should make fulfilling their responsibilities the top priority.
And it's easier said than done, but we will certainly keep an eye on that. That's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.